Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be making the fetch request to a URL, and the URL is where the spreadsheet data is going to be housed. So usually I like to place the URL within the browser just to make sure that we do have our content sitting there, because there's nothing worse than making a request to a URL that maybe doesn't exist. So setting up a constant variable, call that URL, and then this is where we're going to post the URL that we're connecting to. And then within the fetch request, we're using that same URL value, and we're making a request to that URL value. And fetch is promised based, so we have the then included. And then once we have a response, we're going to return that response object and then use that data that's coming back from the URL and output that in our application. So what we want to do when we get the first response is we want to format it, we want to return that data, and this is going to be going into the next promise, so we're going to have another then as well. And this is the way to, with fetch, to return the response as JSON in a JSON format. And then lastly, let's do our other promise, and this is the promise once we actually have the data object and it's ready to use. So for usually I do want to make sure that it is working, so I just console log out the data and then look at the structure of the data and see if it's usable. So we see our structure of the data is coming back status success, and you can also put in a condition there to make sure that you have status success, and also to make sure that you have some data within the data array. So we've got actually the array data is in data, so I know it's a little confusing, but let's refresh. And we see that we get the array of objects. We got all of the questions within this type of format, so it's array based. So each question has its own object structure. So it's got an answer, which is blue. It's got a bunch of options. So blue is also included within the options. So the answer is within the options. And this gives you the ability to randomize this because it's within an array. So you can randomize it so they don't always aren't within that same order. And then the question itself as well is within an object. So now that we've got the data back, now we can make use of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to load it into the game object. So the game object was the one that we created as a global object, and then we're also going to create the question out of it. So now that we know that we're getting the data back, let's create a game object where we've got all of the total. So this is the total of the data that's being returned back. So data, and because this is an array, we can use length, so that gives us a total. So also let's track what question we're on, so we can do that under the game value. And I'll just comment here that this is the question. And also let's track score, so set the score to 0. So whenever we load the data, that's going to be initiating and starting out the quiz. So we set the score to 0, the game value to 0. And then also let's put the array, so the data array, into a game object called game array. And if you want to see the game data, or you want to see the data that's coming back, you can use for each in JavaScript in order to select each one of the items that are contained within the array. And we're not actually going to be using it here, but I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. So sometimes you might want to fetch the object and then output it directly on the page. So you can do that at this point. So what's going to happen is that once the content loads, we see each one of the questions is being output into the console by this statement here where we're console logging out L. So you can use this if you want. But we are going to be structuring this data because we've placed it within the global game array. So we're able to access that data globally, and we're able to access it in our create question function, which we're going to build in the upcoming lesson. So that's where we're going to call the create question function. Once we load the data, we create the question with that data, and that's coming up in the next lesson. So go ahead and make the connection to the endpoint, get the data, and then output that data within the console to make sure that you do have a solid connection of the data. And also, I'm going to be showing you in the upcoming lessons how you can create your own endpoint from your own spreadsheet. So if you don't like the questions I'm using, you're going to be able to create your own endpoint. and output it, and then simply update the URL and get your own data and create your own quiz. So that is all still yet to come in the upcoming lessons.